The first moth was Euplagia quadripunctaria. She did not say this aloud. She had been told to wait, but she had been standing in front of the table for 40 seconds, and she had identified 11 of the 17 specimens in that time, and she was now waiting with the specific patience of a woman who has been right for a very long time and has learned to wait anyway. Her name was Maud Fenwick. She was 32 years old. There was a physician's report on file with this committee, 18 years old, which described her mind as working the wrong way. The committee was here to decide whether the report was accurate. She was here because she had been told she had to be. The table held 17 specimens, a tray of pinned moths, a box of pressed botanical specimens, their labels typed in the Society's standard format, 3 jars of preserved river mollusks, a stack of hand-drawn plates, each one numbered but not named, a single bird's egg, blown and mounted, 2 mineral samples from the Dorset coast, a fragment of lichen on a piece of bark. There were 6 men seated along the far wall, 4 naturalists, a physician, and a duke, who had arrived 11 minutes late and taken the last chair at the end of the row without apology or explanation. Maud had looked at him once, briefly, taking inventory, cataloguing, filing, and then returned her attention to the table. The chairman cleared his throat. "Miss Fenwick, you understand the purpose of this examination? I understand that Professor Crane has submitted a report to this committee describing my mental state as disordered, and that the committee has agreed to test my competence before deciding whether to pursue the matter further." She kept her voice even. She had been keeping her voice even for 14 years. "I understand that I am here to demonstrate whether I am capable of the work I have claimed to have produced." Ashby looked at the man beside him, the physician, Dr. Harwell, who was 70 years old and had written the original assessment of Maud's mental state in 1836, when she was 14, and he had been called to her father's house because her father was worried and didn't know what else to do. Harwell's expression was the expression of a man who had committed a position a long time ago and was not disposed to revise it. "You may begin," Ashby said. She already had. Maud looked at the table properly now, formally for the record, in the manner they expected. She did not pick anything up. She stood with her hands at her sides, attentive, a mind working very fast that knew better than to move while it was doing so. The men along the wall watched her. Harwell watched her with the focused attention of a man looking for what he expected to find. She said, "The first moth is Euplagia quadripunctaria, Jersey tiger, July emergence, coastal habitat. The hind wing pattern is diagnostic. The second is Arctia caja, garden tiger, common, not interesting. The third is Callimorpha dominula, scarlet tiger. This one is unusual. The pin placement suggests it was collected from the Avon Valley rather than the coast. The larval habitat is different, and whoever pinned this collected it at the wrong time of year. It's an August specimen, but the wing condition is consistent with a June emergence, which means it was kept too long before mounting. The data on this specimen is compromised." Silence. She moved along the table. "The botanical specimens. Plate 1 is Helleborus foetidus, stinking hellebore. The label says April. That's wrong. This flower was pressed in late March. The petal edges haven't begun to brown at the margin the way April specimens do, and the stem moisture content at pressing was higher than April would give you." She looked up briefly at the committee. None of them were writing. "The label on Plate 3 is correct. Plate 5 has been misidentified. That is not Geranium pratense. It is Geranium sylvaticum. The leaf lobes are deeper. You can see the difference clearly in the second and fourth lobes." The chairman looked at the naturalist to his left. The naturalist was looking at the botanical specimens with an expression Maud had learned to read, the expression of a man who is checking whether she is right. She was right. She was always right about specimens. That was not the problem. She continued. The river mollusks took 40 seconds. The mineral samples took 20. Chalk with embedded flint from the Upper Cretaceous, nothing remarkable, and a piece of ironstone that had been mislabeled as sandstone, which she noted without emphasis. The bird's egg was a lapwing's, she said, which was correct and uncontroversial. The lichen on the bark was the most interesting specimen on the table, Lobaria pulmonaria, she said, which indicated old-growth woodland, and the bark fragment was from a sessile oak, and the combination suggested a site in the west of England that had not been disturbed in at least 200 years, and if the committee wanted to know where she thought the collection site was, she could tell them. She stopped. 6 minutes had elapsed. Mr. Ashby looked at his notes. He looked at the naturalists to his left. He looked at Harwell. Harwell said, "The manner of presentation is consistent with the disordered associative thinking noted in the original assessment. The subject moves between categories without completing analysis of each specimen before proceeding to the next." Maud looked at him. "I completed analysis of each specimen. I presented the analyses in the order the specimens were placed, which is the order on the table. The categorization was yours, not mine. You described the moth collection before completing the botanical specimens. The moths are at the left end of the table. The botanical specimens are in the center. That is not associative disorder. That is left to right." A sound from the end of the row. Not a laugh. Something shorter than a laugh, controlled before it became one. Maud looked at the Duke. He was looking at her. Hazel eyes. Patient. The particular patience of a man who is accustomed to watching things develop slowly and does not mind. He said nothing. He made a small notation on the paper in front of him. Now, if you are listening to this for the first time, welcome. If you have been here before, then you know what I am about to tell you, which is that the room Maud Fenwick was standing in on a Tuesday morning in October of 1854 was not simply a committee room in the Aldenmoor Natural History Society's offices in Bloomsbury. It was the same room that had been deciding what women could and could not know for 200 years. Different chairs, different names on the wall plaques, different specimens on the table. The same room. Let me take you back to where it started. Maud's father was Thomas Fenwick, naturalist, fellow of the Linnean Society, author of 4 monographs on the invertebrates of southern England. He had spent 30 years of his life in fields and hedgerows and on the Dorset coast, crouching over rock pools and wading through marshes and returning home to a study that smelled of camphor and dried specimens. He had married Amrita Sharma in Calcutta in 1817, a woman who could identify every plant in the Bengal garden by its Sanskrit name, and who had spent her girlhood learning the medicinal properties of things that English botany had not yet catalogued. She had come to England and found the climate impossible and the society more so, and she had died when Maud was 7 of a fever that had nothing to do with the climate or the society, just the bad luck of a woman who caught the wrong thing at the wrong time. Maud had her mother's skin, her mother's eyes, her father's habit of attention. Thomas Fenwick had noticed by the time Maud was 8 that his daughter's attention was not the ordinary kind. Most children attended to what they were asked to attend to. Maud attended to everything simultaneously, in parallel, with the focused inclusivity of a mind that had not yet learned that most people preferred narrower angles of observation. She would sit at the dinner table and answer a question about her lessons, and then, in the same breath, observe that the candle to the left was burning faster than the one to the right because of a draught from the window. and that the draft meant the window latch was loose, and that if the window latch was loose in October, it would be a problem in November, and Thomas should tell the housekeeper. Thomas told the housekeeper. The housekeeper confirmed the latch. Maud went back to her dinner. This was, to Thomas Fenwick, not alarming. This was, to Thomas Fenwick, entirely familiar. He had been doing something similar for 60 years, and it had served him well. To other people, it was more complicated. The physician was called when Maud was 14. Her father had been away in Cornwall for 6 weeks, and in his absence his sister, a woman of considerable social competence and limited scientific patience, had been managing the house. The aunt had sat across a dinner table from Maud for 6 weeks and found the experience disorienting in ways she could not entirely articulate. The child didn't look at you when you spoke. She answered questions correctly, but her answers contained information you hadn't asked for. She spent 4 hours in a field on a Wednesday and returned unable to explain where she had been, not because she had forgotten, but because her explanation involved 17 species of grassland plant and their relationships to the local soil chemistry, and the aunt did not have the vocabulary to receive the explanation, which Maud had not understood and had tried to provide again, more slowly, which had not helped. Dr. Harwell was a physician of good reputation and the kind of confidence that fills rooms without quite touching the walls. He examined Maud for 20 minutes. He asked her questions. She answered them accurately and, because she had been told to be forthcoming, extensively. He noted that her eye contact was irregular. He noted that she moved between subjects without apparent transition. He noted that her responses often contained more information than the question required. He wrote in his report, "The patient demonstrates disordered associative thinking, difficulty maintaining conventional social reciprocity, and an unusual pattern of attention that is inconsistent with the expected cognitive development of a young woman of her age and station. The prognosis for conventional social integration is poor." He gave the report to the aunt. The aunt gave it to Thomas, who returned from Cornwall, read the report, went to Maud's room, and sat on the edge of her bed for a long time. "Do you understand what it says?" he asked. "He thinks my mind works the wrong way," Maud said. She was 14. She had read the report twice. "He means I don't think in a line, I think in a web. Everything connects to everything else, and I follow the connections." Thomas was quiet. "Does that feel wrong to you?" Maud thought about it carefully. Carefully, completely. Once. "It feels like how I think," she said. Thomas nodded. He took the report. He did not destroy it. He should have, but he didn't. Perhaps because it felt dangerous to destroy a physician's assessment of his child, as though that would make it more true rather than less. He put it in a drawer, and he continued to take Maud to the fields on Wednesdays and Saturdays, and he continued to show her what he found there, and he continued to listen with the genuine attention of a man who has encountered a way of seeing that is better than his own, to what she noticed. He died when Maud was 18. He left her his study, his instruments, his field notebooks, and a letter that said, "You will have to find a way to do this work that the world will accept. I am sorry that the world requires that. I hope you will find a way that doesn't cost you too much of yourself." She kept the letter. She did not lose it, misplace it, or set it aside. She kept it still. She had been trying to find that way since she was 18. She had not found it, not yet. Professor Aldous Crane had seemed, when she met him at 20, like the answer. He was 62 then, a respected naturalist with a wide correspondence, a fellow of the Linnean Society and the Aldenmoor Society both. He had read her father's monographs. He had read the field notebooks Thomas had left her. He had written to her, formally, respectfully, to ask whether she had any intention of continuing her father's work on the invertebrates of southern England. She had said yes. He had offered an arrangement. She would conduct field work. She would compile the specimens and field data. He would provide the institutional home, the laboratory, the correspondence, the society memberships, the published record. Her work would have a legitimate address. His name would be on the papers because, as he had explained, the Society's membership would not accept papers from a woman with a physician's report on file, but they would accept papers from Aldous Crane, and the work would still exist, and the work was what mattered. At 20, Maud had believed him. The work was what mattered. At 26, she had begun to notice that Crane's understanding of the work had changed. He attended lectures about it. He discussed it with colleagues as though he had generated it. When she asked questions about attribution, he reminded her of the physician's report and what it would mean for the work if she insisted on being attached to it publicly. At 30, she had understood. At 32, she was standing in front of a committee that Crane had convened to confirm that she was disordered, and therefore that any claim she made about the work was the delusion of an unreliable mind. This was, she had recognized when the summons arrived, the cleverest thing he had ever done. One report, 18 years old. That was all it took. The examination continued after the moth incident. Ashby asked Maud to explain her methodology for field specimen collection. She explained it. He asked her to describe the system of classification she used in her notebooks. She described it. Harwell noted, twice, that her presentation moved between subjects without clear sequential structure. Maud noted, both times, that sequential structure was a presentation convention, not a cognitive one, and that the underlying classification was entirely coherent, and that if the committee wished she could demonstrate. The fourth naturalist on the committee, a man named Sayers, who had been silent since the beginning, said, "Please." Maud turned to the specimen table. She picked up one of the pressed botanical plates, the one she had identified as Geranium sylvaticum, than Geranium pratense. "The misidentification was made at the leaf lobe margin," she said. "Here." She indicated the second and fourth lobes without touching the specimen. She never touched specimens without permission, a lesson from her father, who had once watched a careless student destroy an irreplaceable dragonfly with an ungloved finger. Geranium pratense has shallower divisions. Geranium sylvaticum cuts deeper, and the sinus, the gap between lobes, is narrower. The difference matters for habitat recording. Pratense is a meadow plant. Sylvaticum is a woodland edge plant. Incorrect identification means the habitat record is wrong, which means any subsequent research using this record to understand population distribution will be wrong. She put the plate down. The methodological issue, she continued, is that the two species are most easily distinguished in the field before pressing. Once pressed, the three-dimensional characteristics that make identification straightforward are flattened, which means the identification should have been made in the field and wasn't, which tells you something about the collection practice. She looked at Sayers. "That is the kind of connection I follow," she said. "From specimen error to collection methodology to the reliability of the underlying record. The connections are not disordered. They are sequential. They are simply faster than the conventional presentation." Sayers looked at his notes. He looked at the specimen. He looked at Maud. "She's right," he said to Ashby, not quietly. "She's right about the misidentification." From the end of the row, the Duke spoke for the first time. "Miss Fenwick," his voice was measured, unhurried. "The lichen specimen. You said the collection site was old-growth woodland in the west of England. How specific can you be?" Maud looked at him. He looked back. The patience again, that specific quality of attention that was not passive, that was actively holding itself still. Lobaria pulmonaria needs clean air, old wood, and continuous woodland cover. The bark fragment is sessile oak. The lichen growth pattern on this fragment suggests an old specimen, probably 80 to 100 years on this particular bark surface. The moss community visible at the fragment edge is consistent with Devon or Somerset old growth. Given the bark curvature, this is from a mature oak, probably a century or more. She paused. I can narrow it further if you tell me where Professor Crane collected in Devon last September. Silence. He conducted a survey of the Exe Valley, Sayers said slowly. Then the collection site is probably Dunsford Wood, Maud said. It is the only old-growth site of that character within the Exe Valley survey area. The committee looked at one another. Harwell said, in a tone that had lost some of its confidence, "The pattern of the answers remains consistent with disordered associative—" "No," said the Duke. He said it quietly. He did not raise his voice or lean forward. He said it with the flat finality of a man who has made a decision. "No?" Harwell turned to look at him. "She is following chains of evidence. Each observation leads to the next by logic, not by association. There is nothing disordered in the structure. The presentation is compressed." She moves quickly through the intermediate steps, but every step is there if you follow it. He looked at Maud. "Show me the intermediate steps. Take the lichen example from the beginning." She took him through it. The air quality requirements of Lobaria pulmonaria, the bark species identification, the growth pattern indicating age and continuity, the moss community as an additional indicator of habitat type, the bark curvature as a size indicator for the host tree, the combination of factors narrowing the geography, 8 steps, clear, sequential. When she finished, the Duke made a notation. He looked at the notation for a moment. Then he said to Ashby, "I'd like to suspend the examination for today." Ashby blinked. "Your Grace, we have adequate demonstration of Miss Fenwick's competence. The question of the attribution of Professor Crane's published work is a separate matter and should be addressed as a separate matter." He stood. He was taller than she had expected. She revised her earlier catalogue. "Miss Fenwick, I am Crispin Rowe. I would like to continue this conversation at your convenience, in a less adversarial setting." Maud looked at him. She looked at the committee. She looked at the 17 specimens on the table, 14 of which she had correctly identified, 1 of which she had corrected, and 2 of which she had noted were incompletely documented. "I am available Friday afternoon," she said. "Friday afternoon," he said. "Good." He gathered his papers, bowed to the chairman, a precise, unelaborate bow, and left. The committee looked at the door, then at Maud, then at each other. Harwell's report was not formally withdrawn that day. These things do not happen in a day. But Maud Fenwick walked out of the examination room at 11:30 on a Tuesday in October, and she walked out with the lichen specimen in her mind and the 8 intermediate steps still running in sequence, and she walked out knowing, for the first time in 14 years, that someone had followed the chain all the way to the end and had not told her she was wrong. She had been right. She was always right about specimens. The question had always been who would accept that. If you are still here, if you have followed this story from the examination room to the corridor and down into the October Street, thank you. You have followed 8 steps with her. There are more to come. This is Duke of Hearts Romance. If you are new here, welcome. We tell stories about people the world filed under the wrong name. Subscribe so you do not miss what comes next. Now, back to Bloomsbury. She walked home along the Bloomsbury streets, and did not look at the sky, and did not think about the Duke's notation, and did not think about the word "no" spoken in a flat, decided voice, by a man who had followed 8 steps without asking her to slow down. She thought about those things later, alone at her desk, with her notebooks and a candle and the October dark outside the window. She was working on the vocabulary for what she thought. It was not yet adequate. The Friday conversation took place in the reading room of the Aldenmoor Society, which was empty on Friday afternoons, because Crane used Fridays for field work, and most of the other members went elsewhere after Thursday meetings. Maud had known this since she began the arrangement with Crane. She had, in fact, used the reading room on Friday afternoons for most of those years, working at the table nearest the window with the Society's collection of international correspondence, which contained a remarkable amount of material, from German and French naturalists, that no one else appeared to read because no one else in the Society read German or French. Maud read both. Her mother's insistence on languages carried through her father's library. The Duke arrived at 2 o'clock. He came alone, no secretary, no man of business. He carried a leather satchel that had seen considerable use. He sat across the table from her and set the satchel on the floor, and placed his hands on the table, and looked at her with those hazel eyes that did the reading thing, the patient inventory thing. She had her field notebooks on the table in front of her, 4 of them, spanning the last 3 years of Avon Valley fieldwork. She had brought them deliberately. She had decided on the walk to Bloomsbury that morning that she was done with the habit of concealment, which had been useful for 14 years and had now run its course. "You are going to tell me," he said, "that the published papers are yours." 14 of them, Maud said. The field work, the specimen collection, the classification, the analysis. Crane wrote the final draft for some of the earlier ones. After 1848, he was largely transcribing my notes with changes to the sentence structure. How do you know this? Because I can tell the difference between his thinking and mine. His early contributions are visible in the methodological framing of the 1842 and 1843 papers. After that, the framing changes. The questions the papers ask are the questions I was asking in my field notebooks. She opened the top notebook. This is the 1851 survey, the Avon Valley. This page is the 5th of June, the day I found the emergence anomaly. She turned it toward him. 3 species of mayfly, all emerging 3 weeks earlier than the published emergence dates predicted. I recorded the water temperature at every collection point that day. The connection between the temperature deviation and the emergence timing is on this page, in this notebook, on the 5th of June, 1851. The Crane paper was submitted in September 1851. It presents the same connection as though it were being articulated for the first time. He looked at the notebook, at the date, at the data recorded in her clear left slanting hand. "Can you prove it?" he said. "I kept copies of my field notebooks. I also have my original drafts. Not for all the papers. I was not, in 1840, recording things with proof in mind. After 1847 I was." She paused. "There is also Ruth Pryor. The printer. You have been investigating." I asked 3 questions. One of the answers was Ruth Pryor. He leaned forward slightly, not pressing, readjusting. "What does Ruth Pryor have?" "She set the type for every paper Crane submitted to the Society Journal. The original manuscripts were submitted to her press in longhand. She kept them." Maud watched him. "She has not yet agreed to produce them. She has a working relationship with Crane that she values, but she has not destroyed them." "Have you spoken to her?" "I have asked 3 times over the past 2 years whether she still has the originals. She has confirmed each time that she has them." Maud folded her hands on the table. They were not quite still. A slight movement in the fingers, the involuntary working of a mind that was running 3 parallel calculations. She has not agreed to show them. I believe she is waiting for something to change. What would have to change? She said, someone with authority would have to ask her. He was quiet for a moment. Not the silence of a man considering whether to act. The silence of a man who has already decided and is determining the precise form the action will take. He said, "Tell me about the 1851 paper, the survey of the Avon Valley invertebrates." She told him. The field methodology, the collection schedule, the classification system she had developed specifically for that survey, the anomaly in the mayfly data that had led her to revise the conventional understanding of emergence timing in chalk streams. She spoke without notes. She spoke in the compressed, sequential way she always spoke, following the chains, and he listened without interrupting. And when she paused, twice, at natural breaks in the chain, he asked the precise question that indicated he had followed where she was going and wanted the next link. He was the second person in her life who had done that. The first was her father. She noticed this. She catalogued it. She did not yet assign it its full significance. After an hour, he stood. He picked up the satchel. He said, "I will speak to Ruth Pryor. She may not respond to authority alone. I am aware." He looked at her with the patient eyes. "I intend to tell her what happens to work that is lost. I have some personal acquaintance with the question." She waited. He said, "My brother had an unusual mind." He said it without preamble, the way he said most things, without ceremony, waited. "His name was George. He was 4 years younger than me. As a child he collected beetles, not casually, not the way boys collect things to put in jars and forget about, methodically. He had a system of labels that he devised himself at the age of 9. Date of collection, location, habitat description, behavior observed. His handwriting was very small because he wanted the labels to fit on the specimens without obscuring them, and he had worked out that if he reduced his letters to 3 millimeters, he could include all 4 categories on a label the size of his thumbnail. He was looking at the table, at the field notebook Maud had left open on its pages. When he was 12, he had a fever, a bad one, 6 days, very high, and when he came through it, the physician said he was changed. Not in his body, in his manner. He became difficult to manage. He would not attend to lessons in the way that was expected. He answered questions in ways that were accurate but not sequential, and the tutor could not follow him, and the tutor said so, and the physician was recalled and wrote a report. A pause. The report said what these reports always say: disordered, incapable of conventional social integration, a risk to himself and those around him, which was a phrase that I never understood and still do not understand, because George had never been a risk to anyone. He had been a boy who collected beetles and wrote very small. But the phrase was in the report, and my father believed the report because my father believed physicians, which is what men of his generation were taught to do. He stopped. Maud waited. "We sent him to an establishment in Surrey," he said. "I was 16. I was told it was the best available, which I believed because I did not know enough to question it and because I was 16 and my father had made the decision." He picked up his pen. "Set it down. He died there at 19. The certificate said fever, which was probably true because those establishments were not clean and the winters were bad. I have spent 17 years with the question of whether the fever was the cause or whether the cause was being removed from everything he knew and confined in a room with people who did not understand the way he thought." He looked at her directly. "I believe the physicians were wrong about the pattern. I believe what they called disordered was a different order, Not inferior, not dangerous, simply different. I am not able to return what that cost, George. The collection was destroyed when he was sent away. The establishment did not know what it was." He was quiet for a moment. "But I find myself disinclined to watch the same mistake made about someone who is still here to be corrected for." Maud looked at her hands, at the soil she had not entirely removed from under her right thumbnail, at the ink on the outer edge of her left palm where the pen rested. She said, "Thank you." He nodded. He left. She sat at the reading-room table for a long time after the door closed, with the afternoon sun coming through the window at a low angle, the way October sun does in London, thin and specific and falling across the corner of the table, where her field notebook lay open to a page of observational notes from last Thursday's field visit to Hampstead Heath. The page was full. Her name was not on it. She had stopped putting her name on her own field notebooks 7 years ago, when Crane had reminded her for the third time that the physician's report meant her notebooks were inadmissible as evidence of anything. She had stopped because it seemed pointless. Now she looked at the nameless page and thought about 14 years of nameless pages and the specific peculiar cost of erasing yourself from your own work to keep the work alive. She turned to the front of the notebook. She picked up her pen. She wrote her name. Maud Fenwick, October 1854. It took 4 seconds. It was the first time she had signed a field notebook in 7 years. Her handwriting, clear, slanted slightly to the left, the particular hand of a person who learned to write without being told how, looked back at her. She was still working on the vocabulary, but it was becoming more adequate. Ruth Pryor ran a press on Gray's Inn Road that had been producing learned society publications for 30 years. She was a small woman of 53, with gray hair cut practically short, and hands that were permanently stained with ink in a way that made Maud's own ink-stained hands feel a kinship she had never named. She had set the type for Crane's first paper in 1834. She had set the type for every paper since. The Duke visited her on a Monday morning. Maud had not asked to accompany him. She had considered asking and had decided against it, not from deference, but from calculation. Ruth Pryor's hesitation was not about authority. It was about something older than that. The particular reluctance of a woman who has held something dangerous for a long time and is not sure what releasing it will cost. Another woman in the room might make her more cautious, not less. She received his account of the visit that afternoon, delivered to the Aldenmoor reading room by way of a note left with the porter. The note said, "She has the manuscripts. She is considering. She asked me one question. What happens to Maud Fenwick after this?" Maud read this twice. She was at the reading-room table when the note arrived, her field notebook open in front of her, ink on the outer edge of her left palm from 3 hours of specimen notes. She held the note with both hands. The paper was good quality, his stationery heavy, cream. She noticed this without meaning to. 31 originals, 20 years of setting type. Ruth Pryor had kept every one. She wrote back, "Tell her I continue working regardless. I have never stopped." His reply arrived the following morning. She says that is what she needed to know. She will produce the manuscripts on Wednesday, to me, in the presence of 2 witnesses. She asks that you not be present. She finds it easier to produce evidence of someone's erasure when the person being erased is not in the room watching. Maud understood this. She had sometimes the same difficulty watching the data on her own situation. On Wednesday morning, while Ruth Pryor was producing 31 original manuscripts to the Duke of Aldenmoor and 2 solicitors in a room on Gray's Inn Road, Maud was in a field in Hertfordshire collecting the winter specimens she collected every October. the overwintering insects, the last of the autumn fungi, the seeds that would not germinate until March. She worked for 6 hours. She filled 14 pages. She wrote her name on each one. Maud Fenwick, October 1854. She was home by dusk. She ate. She wrote. She slept. The Duke's note arrived an hour later. It said, "We have 31 manuscripts, all in a consistent hand, all predating the published versions by between 3 weeks and 3 months. The handwriting has been compared to your 1840 field notebook, the one your father signed as witness. They match. Ruth Pryor has also provided a signed statement about the submission process. Sayers has agreed to sit on the review panel. I have spoken to Harwell." Maud read the last sentence again. "I have spoken to Harwell." She did not ask what had been said. She thought she understood. Harwell was 70 years old, and his report was 20 years old, and whatever he had told himself about Maud Fenwick's mind over those 20 years had not, today, survived contact with 31 original manuscripts and the question of what his assessment had been used to do. She was not glad about this. Harwell's discomfort was not something she had sought. She had sought the manuscripts. The manuscripts were what mattered. But she sat with the note in her hand in her small study, in the house on Guilford Street that had been her father's and was now hers, and she allowed herself, carefully, briefly, to feel the specific relief of a weight beginning to shift, not gone, not yet, but moving. Professor Aldous Crane was informed of the review panel's findings on the first day of November. He wrote a letter that afternoon. He wrote it as though the finding had not happened. He was 74 years old, and he had spent 14 years telling himself a story. The story had been simple at first. He was the legitimate voice for work that could not be presented under a woman's name, and the woman in question had a physician's report that confirmed she was not quite right, and therefore the arrangement was not theft, but stewardship. By year 4, the story had been supplemented. By year 8, it had been reinforced so many times that it had the solid, smooth feel of a well-used object. By year 14, Crane had largely forgotten there was a story. He knew the work. The review panel's letter did not feel, to Crane, like a correction. It felt like the removal of something he had always assumed was his. He wrote a letter to the committee. The letter described Maud Fenwick as a capable field assistant whose contributions had been acknowledged in the footnotes of several papers, which was not true. She had been acknowledged in one footnote in 1841, before he understood the full extent of what he was doing, and whose physician's report was a matter of institutional record. The Duke brought this letter to Maud on a Thursday morning at the Aldenmoor reading room. He placed it on the table in front of her. He did not say anything. She read it. She read it a second time. She set it down on the table and looked at the window and thought, with the precision she brought to everything, about what she wanted. She did not want Crane's humiliation. She did not want the committee's apology, which would be delivered in the measured procedural language of institutions apologizing for things they have no intention of ensuring cannot happen again. She did not want Harwell's retraction, which she suspected had been given in the private conversation, and which she suspected was the most genuine thing Harwell had managed in years. She wanted her name on the work. Not retroactively, though the retroactive attribution was a necessary part of the record, and she would pursue it. She wanted now, currently, her name on new work she had produced and would produce, work submitted under Maud Fenwick's name to a society that would have to decide whether to accept it. She said this to the Duke. He listened to the whole sentence. He waited until he was certain the sentence was finished. He said, "The Aldenmoor Society will review your application for membership at the December meeting. They will not admit me." "No, but they will discuss it, and the discussion will create a record. and the record will be the first of many records." He looked at her across the table. "Meanwhile, the Linnean Society's Committee for Correspondence has agreed to accept a submission, under your name, for the spring catalogue." She was quiet. "Sayers approached them," he said. "He argued that the methodological contribution in the 1851 Avon Valley paper, which was yours, as has now been established, represented a significant advance in field classification practice, and that the author of that contribution should be invited to submit a follow-up paper on the chalk stream emergence timing anomaly." "The Linnean Society?" "Yes." She was quiet. The Linnean Society had not admitted a woman as a fellow until— she did not know the date. She did not believe it had happened yet. She did not believe it would happen soon, but the correspondence catalogue was different from fellowship. The correspondence catalogue accepted submissions from naturalists anywhere in the world. It was the mechanism by which the society had published the work of collectors who could not attend meetings, people in India, in Australia, in West Africa, in the Pacific, people who were not in the room, people who were simply sending what they had found. "I want to present it myself," she said, "in person, not as correspondence." The Duke looked at her. "The December meeting is open to non-members presenting on invitation." "Will they invite me?" "Sayers is working on it. I have offered my support." "What does your support look like?" "I sit on the Linnean Society's funding committee," he said. "I have not used that position to influence scientific decisions, and I do not intend to, but I have indicated that I believe the December meeting would benefit from the presentation, and that I find the current practice of attributing field classification work to people who did not conduct it to be a problem worth addressing publicly." He paused. "I believe that is within the scope of a funding committee member's role." Maud looked at her, hands, at the soil under her thumbnail, the ink on her palm, the calluses that came from holding a specimen box for 6 hours in a Hertfordshire field. "If they invite me," she said, "I will present." "Good," he said. "I will be there." She looked up. He looked back with the stillness that was not passivity but held attention, the specific attention of a man who has decided that what is happening in front of him is worth following to the end of the chain. "You have been—" She stopped. She was not accustomed to sentences that required this kind of vocabulary. "You have followed this further than I expected. I said I was disinclined to watch the same mistake made twice." He was quiet for a moment. "George collected beetles. He had 240 specimens by the time he was 12. He labeled each one with the date, the location, the habitat, and 3 observations about the behavior he'd witnessed. The labels were smaller than standard. He wrote small. He always wrote small. But they were precise." He looked at the window. "The collection was destroyed when he was sent away. The establishment did not know what it was." A pause. "I know what this collection is." Maud looked at him for a long time. She said, "I am still working on the vocabulary." "For what?" "For what I intend to say to you eventually." He almost smiled. The change of light, the shift behind the eyes, the expression of a man encountering something that makes him glad to be in the room. "I have some patience," he said. "I know," she said. "That is part of what I am still finding the words for." The invitation from the Linnean Society arrived on the 14th of November. It was addressed to Miss Maud Fenwick, and it requested the pleasure of her presentation at the December meeting on the subject of emergence timing anomalies in Ephemeroptera populations of the southern chalk streams. It was signed by 3 members of the committee, including Sayers, and it was the first piece of formal professional correspondence Maud had ever received addressed to her own name. She was at her desk when it arrived. ink on her left hand, soil still under her thumbnail from the morning field visit she had not yet cleaned off because she had come in and gone straight to the notebooks. She opened the letter with the small knife she kept for specimens. She read it standing up. She sat down halfway through. She put it on her desk beside her father's letter. 2 documents. One that said you will have to find a way. One that said the way has found you. She spent November writing the paper. She wrote it at night after her field work and in the early mornings before the house woke up, in her study with the candle burning and the notebooks open in front of her, and she wrote it in her own name, from the first word to the last, without accommodation or apology or the adjustments she had made for years to fit the work into a container that did not belong to her. Her hands ached by the end of each session. She had been writing in the way she always wrote, fast, pressing slightly too hard, the pen angled left because her hand had never fully accepted the rightward correction. The calluses were in the wrong places for a right-handed writer. They had always been. She had stopped noticing them at 25. She noticed them again in November, working on her own paper, under her own name, and she thought about Crispin's pencil annotations in the margins of the Avon Valley books, cramped, careful, trained against the hand's preference, and the things that bodies remember when minds try to forget. The Duke read 2 drafts. He was not a naturalist. He told her this clearly, early, and she respected it. He read for clarity of argument, for whether the reasoning was followable to a non-specialist, for the places where she compressed the intermediate steps too far and lost a reader who was not already following at her speed. He was good at this. He was also, on one occasion, wrong. In the second draft, he suggested cutting the section on larval metabolic rate. "The general reader won't follow it," he said. "They'll lose the thread, and you'll lose them." Maud looked at the section. She read it back to herself. She said, "If I cut it, the connection between temperature and emergence timing has no mechanism. The reader will accept the correlation without understanding the cause. That is not science. That is assertion." He was quiet. "The section is 12 lines," she said. "I can make it 10, but I cannot remove it. The chain breaks without it." He looked at the 12 lines. He read them with the specific attention he brought to things he was reconsidering. Then he said, "You're right. Make it 10. She made it 10. He did not suggest cutting anything else. She found, as the drafts developed, that she had begun to leave space for his questions before he asked them. She could predict, with reasonable accuracy, the points at which the chain would require more links for a generalist reader. This was not accommodation. It was the natural result of writing for a specific, present, attentive audience. "Page 7, he said during the second draft review. "The relationship between water temperature and emergence timing. You've stated the correlation, but the mechanism isn't explicit." "I assumed it was." "Not to me." "No." She looked at the page. "The mechanism is the metabolic rate of the larval stage. Temperature increases metabolic rate, which shortens the larval period, which moves the emergence date earlier. That is the chain." "Then write it." She wrote it. On the morning of the December meeting, she rose at 5 and walked to the Hertfordshire field. She collected 2 specimens, a winter moth and a stem of juncus that she had been tracking since September. She carried them to the Linnean Society's meeting room on Piccadilly in a small wooden case that had been her father's, with his initials still visible on the brass clasp and her name written in her own hand on the label inside the lid. The case had been in her study since her father died. She had used it for field work but had never relabeled it. His initials on the outside. His name, not hers, visible to anyone who looked. She had relabeled it in November, sitting at her desk at midnight after a long day of writing, in the same week she had finished the 3rd draft of the paper. She had taken the old label out and written a new one in her own hand and placed it inside the lid where it was visible when the case was open. Visible to her, visible to anyone she showed it to. Thomas Fenwick had written, "You will have to find a way to do this work that the world will accept." She had found the way. The label was the evidence. The meeting room held 40 people. She had expected fewer. She stood at the front of the room with her field case and her paper and her notes and looked at 40 faces, most of them. Men, most of them older than her, most of them wearing expressions that contained varying degrees of skepticism and interest and the measured attention of people who are uncertain what they are about to witness. The Duke was in the third row. He was not watching her with the anticipatory tension of someone waiting for her to succeed or fail. He was watching her the way he always watched her, taking stock, noting what was there, present, simply present. She set her notes on the lectern. She did not look at them. She began. She told them about the Avon Valley Survey of 1851. She told them about the anomaly she had found in the mayfly emergence data, how 3 species had emerged 3 weeks earlier than the published emergence dates predicted. She told them why this mattered, that it indicated a change in chalk stream temperature regimes, that the change was consistent with a broader pattern of thermal alteration in southern chalk streams over the previous decade, and that if the pattern continued, it would have measurable effects on the invertebrate communities that formed the base of the chalk stream food chain. She told them about the methodology, the collection schedule, the temperature records she had kept alongside the emergence data, which no previous survey had bothered to gather because temperature and emergence timing had not been connected in the literature. She told them about the connections. She spoke for 40 minutes. She spoke in the compressed, sequential way she always spoke, following the thread from specimen to system to implication, and at each pause she looked at the room and waited. 40 people looked back at her. 12 of them were writing. The questions began before she had finished. 3 came from the same man in the second row who had been writing most furiously, a thin-faced naturalist she did not recognize who wanted to know more about the temperature measurement methodology and whether it was consistent across the survey period, and whether she had considered the effect of seasonal variation on the baseline. She answered all 3. He wrote faster. Sayers asked 2 questions, both of them precise, and both of them requiring her to make explicit the intermediate steps that she had compressed. She made them explicit. She saw the room following. At the back, a man she did not know raised his hand and asked, "The paper you've described, is this an extension of Professor Crane's 1851 survey of the Avon Valley?" The room stilled. Maud looked at the man. She said, "Professor Crane's name is on the 1851 publication, the field work, the specimen collection, the classification system, and the analysis described in that publication are mine. I conducted the Avon Valley survey. The attribution of the published paper is the subject of an ongoing review by the Aldenmoor Society's committee. This paper, which I am presenting today under my own name, is the continuation of that work." The room was quiet. Sayers, from his seat, said, "The Aldenmoor Review Committee has found, provisionally, that the 1851 Avon Valley paper was based on Miss Fenwick's field data and analysis. The review is ongoing." Another silence. The man in the second row, who had been writing furiously, looked up. He said, "May I have a copy of your notes from the temperature survey, the raw data?" She sent it to him the following week. He published a paper about it 3 months later. He cited her name, in print, in the Linnean catalogue, under her own work. She read it 4 times. Crane resigned from the Aldenmoor Society in January. He did not do so dramatically. He wrote a letter to the committee describing his health as requiring him to step back from active society membership, which was plausible and convenient, and the kind of exit that institutions accept because they prefer it to anything that would require them to make a formal finding about a respected fellow. He was gone. That was all. Maud did not feel the resignation as vindication. It was a document in the record. It was a data point. It told her something about institutional self-preservation that she had already known. What she felt as vindication was the letter from the Linnean Society, received on the 4th of January, inviting her to submit the complete emergence timing data for publication in the Spring Correspondence Catalogue, and the letter from the German naturalist in Munich who had read a summary of her December presentation and wanted to compare notes on water temperature methodology, and the letter from a woman in Edinburgh who had read the same summary and said only, "I have been doing something similar with pond invertebrates in the Highlands. I didn't know anyone else was tracking this." Maud wrote back to all three. She wrote back to the woman in Edinburgh first. On the 15th of January, in the Aldenmoor reading room on a Friday afternoon, the Duke asked her a question she had been working on, the vocabulary for since October. He said, "You said you were still working on the vocabulary for what you intended to say to me eventually. Have you made progress?" She looked at her field notebook, open on the table in front of her. At her name on the inside cover, written in November, still there. She said, "I have 14 years of work that is mine. I have been working on saying that since October, and I can say it now. I have a methodology that I developed without assistance and that I intend to continue developing. I have a correspondence that is growing. I have a paper in the Linnean Catalogue and 2 more in progress." She looked up. "What I am working on the vocabulary for is the part that is about you specifically and not about the work." "Tell me what you have so far," he said. She looked at him, at the patient eyes, at the man who had sat in a committee room and said no, and followed 8 steps to the end and spoken to a printer and read 2 drafts and asked about page 7 and sat in the 3rd row. "You waited," she said, "for the complete answer. Every time I paused, you waited. I have spoken to perhaps 40 people in my life who waited. My father was one. You are the second." She folded her hands on the table. "I am 40% of the path to the vocabulary, and the remaining 60% involves more time, which I am willing to invest." He was quiet. "That is honest," he said. "I am always honest." "I know." The almost smile, the change of light. "I am patient." "I know that, too." Outside the Aldenmoor reading room window, January rain fell on the Bloomsbury street. The gas lamps were lit already, though it was only 3:30. The room smelled of old paper and camphor from the specimen cabinets and the cold that finds its way under a sash window in January. It was not a romantic room. It was a working room, with marks on the table from 40 years of naturalists putting their cases down too hard, and ink stains on the window-sill and shelves of correspondence that no one had catalogued in 30 years. Maud had been coming to this room for 14 years. It looked different when someone else was in it who saw it clearly. She turned to the notebook. She continued her field notes from Thursday's Hertfordshire visit. He opened the satchel and produced a paper he was reading for the funding committee. They worked in the same room for 2 hours, until the gas man came to turn up the lamps for the evening, at which point he put on his coat and she put on hers, and they walked out onto the Bloomsbury Street, and he said he was going in the direction of Piccadilly, and she said she was going in the direction of Guildford Street. "We are going in opposite directions," she said. "For now," he said. She looked at him. 40%, he said. "When you reach 60, tell me." She said, "It will be spring. The chalk streams are best in April." "Then I will see you in April," he said. He walked toward her. Piccadilly. She walked toward Guildford Street. The rain had eased to mist. The gas lamps made the wet stone shine. She did not look back. She was thinking about the chalk streams in April and the temperature records she would start collecting in February, and the woman in Edinburgh with the pond invertebrates, and the letter she would write tomorrow. She was thinking about the spring, 6 months later. The Dorset field in April was cold in the mornings and warm by 11. The chalk hills held the light in a particular way, low and clear and specific to the season, and the hedgerows were in the first week of leaf, still translucent, the pale green of things that have just returned. Maud was at the eastern end of the transect, crouching by the stream bank with her sample jars and her temperature gauge, when she heard him on the path behind her. She had been expecting him since 9. He was 20 minutes late, which she had accounted for in her collection schedule. "The stile at the lane end," he said by way of explanation. "I know. It's broken. I left you a note at the gate." "I didn't see it. It was under the stone on the left. I looked under the stone on the right." She looked up. He was standing on the bank above her with the specimen case, hers, her father's, the brass clasp and her name on the inside, in one hand and his hat in the other, because the morning was too warm for a hat, and he had learned this in February during their first Hertfordshire transect. He was looking at the stream with the attentive expression that meant he was cataloguing. He had been doing that since November, learning to catalogue. Not with her precision, he was not a naturalist and did not pretend to be, but with the specific attention of a man who has decided that the way someone sees the world is worth learning, not to replicate it, but to follow it. She had noticed this. She had watched him develop it over 6 months and had not said anything about it, because it did not require comment. It was evidence. It went in the record. 2 species of mayfly nymph visible from here, he said. 3, she said. The third is under the flat stone at the left bend. He looked at the flat stone. I can't see it from here. No, I saw it yesterday. It will be there. She sealed the sample jar. She stood, brushing the bank mud from her knees. Pass me the case. He passed it. Their hands met on the handle, his right hand, her left, and he did not let go immediately, and she did not step back. 40%, she said. Last January. Yes. I said spring. She looked at the stream, at the flat stone at the left bend, under which a third mayfly species was waiting to be found. I am at 80. He turned toward her. The chalk hill light was behind him, low and clear. What constitutes the remaining 20? He asked. Saying it in a complete sentence, she said. In sequence, with the intermediate steps explicit, then say it. She said it. She said, I have 14 years of work, and I intend to keep working, and I have a methodology and a correspondence and a paper in the Linnean catalogue and the woman in Edinburgh, and I do not intend to stop for any reason. I have said all of that clearly. The remaining sentence is this. I find that I am not indifferent to your presence in these fields, and I find that indifference is no longer an accurate description of what I experience when you wait at the end of a chain for the next link. I find that I have been building toward this sentence since October, and that I am now at the end of it. She stopped. He was very still. The chalk stream ran over the stones. A blackbird, somewhere behind them, ran through its repertoire. He said, the intermediate steps were entirely explicit. I said they would be. He put his hat down on the bank. He looked at her, at the soil on her knees, the ink on her palm, the specimen case in her hand with her name on, the label inside. I have been patient, he said. I would like to stop being patient now, if that is acceptable. It is acceptable, she said. He did not say anything else. Neither did she. The blackbird continued. The stream continued. The third mayfly nymph was under the flat stone at the left bend, exactly where she had said it would be, and when they went to check it, 20 minutes later, it was there. She recorded it in the field notebook. Third mayfly species, flat stone, left bend, chalk stream, Dorset, April 1855. She wrote her name at the top of the page, Maud Fenwick. She did not stop to note that it was the first time a field record of hers had been witnessed. He witnessed it. He was carrying the case. Now. I want to tell you something about the world in which Maud Fenwick worked, because the committee room was not exceptional, it was ordinary. The Linnean Society of London, founded in 1788, did not admit women as fellows until 1905. 117 years. The Royal Society of London, founded in 1660, did not elect women as fellows until 1945. The British Museum's Natural History Department employed women as collectors and cataloguers throughout the 19th century. Low-paid, unnamed, essential to the collection and the record. Their contributions are largely invisible in the published literature. Mary Anning of Lyme Regis discovered the first ichthyosaur fossil in 1811. She was 12 years old. The specimen was eventually sold to the British Museum, attributed to various male collectors, and it was not until the late 20th century that her contributions to paleontology were formally acknowledged. She died in 1847, the year the Geological Society debated whether to admit women and voted no. Priscilla Susan Berry published botanical illustrations under the initials PSB for most of her career. Beatrix Potter's research on the germination of spores was rejected by the Linnean Society in 1897 because it was submitted by a woman. It was presented on her behalf by a male colleague. The unnamed field collectors, women who gathered specimens for Banks, for Hooker, for the great surveys of the 18th and 19th centuries, number in the hundreds. Their names are not in the published records. Their specimens are in the cases. Maud Fenwick is fiction. The cases are real. If you have ever had your name removed from something you built, this story is yours. If you have ever been told your mind works the wrong way because it works differently, this story is yours. If you have ever been right and been told the problem was how you said it rather than whether you were correct, this story is yours. Where did it land? The examination room, the 8 steps, the note that said what happens to Maud Fenwick after this, the flat stone at the left bend of the stream? Write it in the comments. I read every single one, and if you are new here, welcome. This is Duke of Hearts Romance. We tell stories about people the world filed under the wrong name. Subscribe. The next one is already waiting. Good night. I'll see you in the next one.